So, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you very much for introducing yourselves. And thank you, Deb, for opening us up with karakia. Mai te timatanga. So I appreciate that. So ko wai aho. So who am I? He mokopuna tēnei no te taitoke rau me te tai rāwhiti. Ko he mi te kapa a tōku tīpuna. So I'm a grandchild of the far north, the real far north. So we're talking a stone throw away from Cape Reinga in the far north. And also Ngāti Porou on the east coast and Rangitukia. And my tūpuna is he mi te kapa. And so I'm Anglican, he mihi ngare ahau, mai tōku whanaungatanga from the day I was born. And I have never looked anywhere else, to be fair. I am the youngest sibling of 12. And my siblings, I have 5. 4 of those have passed, but I have 5 siblings who are ordained priests. My father was our local layman back in the far north, and my grandfather was one of the early missioners, Matiu Kapa, who was at St. John's, and my auntie was the first Māori ordained woman in our church, Puti Murray. And so it's that background that gives me my strength, that background that reminds me that life is a responsibility, not always a walk in the park, but a responsibility. And so ko Hera Clarke, dancer, and I use the name dancer as well, tōku ingoa. I want to begin by saying also that just to give a little bit of context to who I am and what gives me, I guess, the place that I'm currently sitting in, some kind of stability. And so initially I began my social work journey in 1985. 1985, I was a young parent, and I started as a care and protection social worker. And some of you might remember, I'm sure, the Department of Social Welfare, DSW. It's a long call from those days now, and it's had several iterations since, and I have worked in most of them. So my role was as a frontline care and protection social worker. I held several roles during my time as a government worker, including interviewing victims and offenders, working with sexual abuse investigations. I was part of what they used to call in the old days the DSAC team, which works specifically to do the investigations of sexual abuse. I also worked with and trained in whānau dynamics, and at that time, those that led the whānau dynamics pieces of work in Auckland used to be Pāhenare Tate. And Pa Tate was a wonderful Catholic priest who was brave enough to take me while I was like, I guess, and the church term would be a curacy. I did a 12-month curacy with Pa Tate, and so there at Tungawaka, and so that enabled me to kind of know all about motiti and pawarenga and the best oysters I've ever tasted. During that time, equally, I was a senior social worker and did a lot of work in family violence. what I didn't say earlier, but you've probably picked it up already. My first language was Māori, and I learned English from the age of 12, and I think I'm getting better every day. And so, therefore, leading a lot of the work in the Crown around domestic violence. In 1992, I took up a role. Well, there's no arguing when your auntie is Puti Murray. Little story very quickly. Auntie Puti arrived in my office in Grey Lynn in 1991 and asked to see me, told the receptionist. The receptionist told me that there's an aggrieved woman waiting for you in reception, and she calls herself Auntie Puti. Well, as I couldn't go out the other door because I'll see her anyway, I went out to see her, and which she greeted me with a big hug and it's time, and a message to say it's time for you to leave the government and return to the church. So there was no real arguing with her except to say I'm not in a position at this current moment, Aunt, to leave a full-time position with 4 children, a brand new house, a husband who was completing his degree, and 2 of those children were in boarding school. So financially, we weren't in a good place. I let her know that I'll pray over this, and she was welcome to come back later. 6 months later, she returned, and I agreed. I resigned from my wonderful weekly paid position, and all the resources that come with that, to take up a position at Te Whareruruhau o Meri, which at the time I was told that I really need to help switch up the services at Te Whareruruhau, because in the early days, Te Whareruruhau was a place of fellowship. It was a place of awhi whānau in its most informal way. They had wonderful sewing classes and preserving, all of which I was not very good at. And so consequently, she instructed me to make of it what I can, coming from the government. And as a consequence, 12 months later, we became an approved formal social service agency, and shared the resources with the Anglican Trust for Women and Children, which funding was therefore handed to Te Whareruruhau to carry out the working with Māori whānau. So I took up that position in Auckland, and I thought it was a wonderful place to be at the time. Bearing in mind, I came from the far north, where shops were few and far between. And so during my tenure, 1992, I left and relocated to Wellington in 2011. So that was a fair span of my life being offered at Te Whareruruhau and setting it up as a social service agency that remains today. Inside that, my time there was really my strongest encounter with God. And it was my celebration that I was fortunate enough to have many, many great people support me, look after me, including, as I said earlier, Puti Murray, my auntie, Hone Ka, Tamahori, the old fella, senior John Tamahori, and of course, when I came to Wellington, I met with the junior. And so part 8, I was definitely in Ruarakena. So you had all of this ecumenical movement to help shape you, to help expose you to forms of healing, forms of liturgy, forms of opportunity to use those skills wisely. So as I said earlier, 2011, I relocated to Wellington, having nearly spent 20 years at social services for the Anglican Church. I worked in Wellington under another relative. I have this thing about relatives who come bossy you around. Bishop Muru Walters, my cousin, and invited to lead the tamariki and whānau support services here in Pōneke. In 2012, I was offered a role at the Ministry of Social Development and carried that out until 2015, where I moved out of Ministry of Social Development, Community Development, and took up the role of Pautaki Māori Principal Advisor for the Chief Social Worker for Oranga Tamariki. So my role there was reading and leading effective practice, training and development, kaupapa Māori forms of practice to help inform and to help strengthen good engagement between government and whānau Māori. And so that's, that was kaupapa Māori forms of practice to include tikanga-based and kaupapa-driven. In 2019, I was asked to return. There's a theme here, as I was reading this, I don't see anything that tells me I had applied. I hadn't applied for a number of these roles. So in 2019, I was invited back to MSD to lead the iwi engagement support services between iwi chairs and service providers in 2019. And in 2022, I accepted the role offered to me by Archbishops Philip Richardson and Archbishop Don Tamihere to this current role of commissary, of which I had no idea what commissary was about. As I understand it now, the role, well, I understood by their discussions with me that it was to become the voice of the Archbishops to lead the work of the Royal Commission Historical inquiry into abuse, and mine, of course, being faith-based, being the Anglican Church. And so that kind of helps to unpack the how, the why, the when, and by whom. And as you can well appreciate, in addition to that, as I said earlier, number 12 out of a family of 12, my flying joke often to my siblings, to my siblings' massive eye roll, as I would say, I felt ever so sorry for my parents. 11 practices till they got to somewhere near perfect. Anyway, that used to cheer me up. And so I would say that in my role, I have met to date with over 300 survivors. I introduced my earlier kōrero because I think that introduces and informs you all of the journey that's been travelled, the skills, the bodies of knowledge that were formed and developed, the blessings and the not so many blessings, that have come my way in this choice of vocation. But it has really been a good scaffolding for me in the journey thus far. And so having met with over 300 survivors who had suffered and endured harrowing and disturbing experiences of physical, sexual, mental, and emotional abuse. I would probably say that for all of that experience that I've introduced to you, I wasn't terribly prepared for this role here with all that I'd endured. I think that, you know, I'm one of those who had been into those homes to uplift children, and I would say in a second, I would do it again. I absolutely do not regret the work that I had done prior to attend different home visits where children had been physically, brutally raw, beaten. I make no apologies for performing the uplift of those children. And I had thought that I had seen everything and heard everything. I would say that my work today probably opened outlets that I'd not had to experience before. And so that required me to kind of shift my my dial up a lot higher and raise my own intentional relationship with God. You know, pouring out and receiving uplift and rejuvenating sometimes. Because I guess no one really prepares you for a time and place where clergy ministry teams I've worked with in my life previous to now, and to find out what I now know. Absolutely leaves you numb. There have been times. And so taking a lot of these experiences into consideration, and I've never felt so close to Christ as I do now in my walk, because yeah, there's much that people can do for you, and it takes you to places where I understand when we say that recite the klakia he honore, he kororia. I understand absolute meaningful sense that goes into the terms. And so with that, I would say to you now that there were common threads that emerged as a result of the meetings with 300 survivors. And now that's including the whānau that they all brought together. Some of them I would have maybe three, sometimes 4 meetings with the one whānau, because where there had been siblings placed in care in the 60s and the 50s, some of the siblings were still alive, and so they would ask if I could meet with other members of their family because they wanted some help to tell their story, and that their belief in God had been, and this is their turn. I'm sorry if some of this language might be upsetting, but it is the language that they used. Some of them talked about being spiritually raped as a result of their experiences. And some of these things, first off, maintaining their, wanting to remain anonymous, because the outcome for many of these survivors, they're still very active. Their extended whānau are still very active in the church. And many of them spoke about their whānau members holding, even including today, holding important roles and responsibilities in the church. And there was a reluctance to, I guess, to muddy the good name of their whānau. And so many of them, and I'd say that this was across the board. This is tikanga Pākehā, tikanga Māori. I hadn't met with Pacifica who shared the same view. I have met with Pacifica, but these weren't their stories. And so maintaining an anonymous position. And if any of you have seen some of the reports from the Royal Commission, you will have noticed that there are many in there who only give an initial, and sometimes those initials are not theirs. The other thing that I received in my visits were an appreciation to a listening service, being able to sit and to listen, taking and drawing breath. So whilst they can appreciate that, I felt a level of privilege to be able to do that. I felt that if that's if that's something that's significant in their experience, to help unload and to help to decipher, and many a times to answer for, and given that my position there was as the church, and I've listened to and had, I've listened to outrage on behalf of the church. I've listened to their internal battles, and some conversations ending in your fault. You did this to us, and da-da-da-da-da. And that's what I mean. I can't say I was really ready. I can only equate that to angry parents because I'm taking their children away. But I think to that level of hatred and anger and their own expressions of brutality, aggressiveness, etc., etc. And so when we can get to the other side of their initial thoughts and feelings, and allowing that anger to go somewhere. I think as they spoke about at the end, just the appreciation to have been able to relieve themselves, to release themselves to what had captured them for the last 20, 30, 40 years. And that listening service, and that's what I called it. I said, well, you know, that's part of the mahi, is to listen. I do represent the church here in this meeting today. I am here to listen, and as I introduced, and I am the commissary, and that's what's required of this role. But it doesn't come without, you can hear it. It doesn't come without its hardship internally. So I'm grateful to great supervision and support that I receive from some very knowledgeable, experienced queer and colleague. And the last one that's been a theme is a slow and informed return to church. You know, and that's got to be a celebration. I know in my heart when they talk about their experiences and how some can, and these are at usually about the third meeting, have thought about that and want to make some early steps back, because my kōrero with them is about the act of abuse upon them was not the act of God. It's not the act of Jesus. It was a human. It's a human action that took place, that the church in particular, more so, but our Christ and our God understanding reminds us that it wasn't the Christ behavior that attacked them. And so having, you know, these conversations, and I'm not sure if I introduced, I'm not clergy. In fact, that was my Auntie Puti's message to me, and my parents, I must say, and my siblings, is it's not your role to be called to orders. That clearly you've proven to us you're a missioner, and yours is not the clergy, and I totally gravitate towards that. So the slow and informed return to church, my messaging and my kōrero with family is not as clergy. I'm not clergy. But I believe in clergy. I believe in those whom have been called for the reasons that we know are God understanding. Those clergy who had conducted themselves in that frame to cause harm, hurt, pain, and to rob young children is not a God act or understanding. And I think that that's kind of where I sit with this, and I've grown to that. I can't tell you that that's how I arrived at it in the first instance. But as I listen more and more to the experiences I'm leaning more toward that, and will further develop that. And I'm hoping that with your help here tonight, it's something that we can really wrestle with, so that this is not a hera kōrero or a hera mahi. This needs to be a whole of church. I remember in Dunedin, the year before last, I remember when it was moved at General Synod that, and I was introduced as the commissary to General Synod. I was quietly appreciative to the bishops for opening that conversation up and allowing, and inviting me to speak up. And my very first messaging in this role was to say that this is not a one man or a one person role. This needs to be a whole of church approach. I will share with you, just by the way, I got quite a there were many that were supportive, and there were those that had said to me, I wish you would just leave this alone and let sleeping dogs lie. Yeah. And I can't leave. I can't let sleeping dogs lie. The impact that it still has on our families today, the intergenerational trauma that remains today is real. We have a responsibility, is all I can say. I see the repercussions, I see the impact on our a lot of children today, a lot of parents today, and we can't wind back the clock now. So during my kōrero with survivors and their whānau, I have been both privileged and challenged, as I said, by the experiences shared to me during my visits. I would say that during some of these visits, opening krakia were not welcome. That's to be expected, but I have to make a start, and my start was with krakia and asking permission, and where the response was no. I'm pleased to say that during some of the visits, opening krakia was instead led by poetry and whakatauki, or a little story about something they learnt while they were in either the orphanages, the care homes, the schools, these homes for, what did they call them? Home for vagrant women. All the different institutions that were under the Anglican Church. Many of them would tell their little stories about, I remember this, about they talk about a particular person, and they always wore a such and such a colour shirt, and I remember the tartan pattern, or and so they would open with something that was relevant for them to talk about. I found this both welcoming, really, and uplifting. What I learned from some of those experiences is how particular karakia triggered survivors. That karakia would be made, karakia would be carried out, and immediately after they were being, they were being raped. And so, of course, this is going to be a trigger. When we talked about their poetry and whakatauki, this led to really deep dive conversations regarding church structure, church priorities to survivor, and what would give survivors confidence to return to church. And these are some of the things that I want to discuss with us in this webinar, really. And I've written a couple of questions from Deb. Oh, sorry. Yes, thank you, Deb. Whakatauki. And so I'm not sure how much time I've got left. Keridwin?
Yeah, so I've been very reluctant to interrupt you, Hera, because I didn't want to interrupt. We normally finish at 8, but
I'm really done.
we can go on for 5 or 10 more minutes after that, but I do need to respect the time frame for everybody here. So are you happy about that?
I'm fine with that.
Great.
Thank you. So mine is really, I've got 3 questions for us tonight. And I'd be really keen, that in this time that we've got left. So my first question is for us to just have some kōrero about is there an interest to write survivor-focused and trauma-informed karakia? Would there be an interest? Is there an appetite for those of us? And second question, is there an interest to hold wānanga to discuss how, as a church, we would welcome survivors known to us to return to church? Obviously, we can't tell when there's no beeping mechanism that comes in so that we can easily identify. But I know certainly I've been very fortunate. I'm very, very grateful to be able to sit myself inside the cathedral. It's big enough to hide. It's big enough to get lost in. And I've had a good number of survivors who have come into the cathedral. I've introduced them to Katie. They've said to me, "Oh, she's a lady." Yes, it happens. She's only young. Yes, that happens. She's offered us a cup of tea to sit down and go and sit down and have a cup of tea and something to eat with her. Is that real? I said, well, you're about to find out in 2 minutes. And, and I would say that's been a wonderful opportunity. So that's the second question. And the last one, is there an interest to learn more about how we as a wider church can support the work of the commissary going forward? Really, I particularly, as I think about the work of the Anglican Women's Desk, and know at least the high numbers of women. That's not to say that it's only women. There are high numbers of women, men also. But I feel comfortable and I feel confident to raise it in this forum. And as an incoming member to the Anglican Women's desk, and in addition to that, as the International Anglican Women's Network representative for Aotearoa, I'm happy and feeling far more comfortable knowing that we're a team. This has been constant quip, I suppose, or comment that I've made is that I'm no Lone Ranger. I can't work on my own or in isolation, and would welcome the support, which is why when I was asked if I would be interested to become part of a member to the Anglican Women's Desk, I immediately responded with a resounding yes, please. So those are my 3 questions that I want to leave with us. And happy if you can respond through Kiradwin. But I think they're top and centre for me for now. I apologise that we didn't get to the report and going forward, and maybe that's another webinar.
Another session, yeah.
My closing would be to say that the 12th of November is the apology to survivors in Parliament. I have to say, of recent days, it's been just disappointing, hugely disappointing. Survivors were informed around the country that some of them will not make it to the apology. They've not been selected in the ballot. And so there's some huge disappointment. I'm looking to approach Katie and possibly Archbishop Justin to see if we can make a space for those who aren't invited. Yet they are travelling here to Wellington. I'm going to see if we can make a place for them at the cathedral. So yeah, that's all from me for now. But thank you, tēnā koutou wahine. Thank you very much for coming along tonight, and kia ora to you, Vicky. Lovely to see you, and I appreciated being on your webinar also.
Yeah.
Kia ora, and thank you so much, Hera. Although it's 8 o'clock, I think it would be really nice just to allow a little bit of time. Anyway, if you would like to all unmute, some of you may like to respond to Hera. So we'll just spend 5 or so minutes doing that before we finish.